Everyone, I'm Chris McEntee. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the American Geophysical Union. And with me is Secretary Sally Jewell, the Secretary of the Department of Interior, and Suzette Kimball, Dr. Suzette Kimball, who's the Director of the U.S.GS. Secretary Jewell.
All right, well, was everybody in the speech that I just gave? If you weren't, could you raise your hands? Okay, a few of you, okay. I don't want to recap the whole thing. I'll just say that my words really were reflective of the importance of science in the work that I've done, an appreciation for the scientists in the room and how they have shaped all of our decisions around public policy, how they are foundational to the work of the department, and how important it is that they communicate their work in plain English so that people understand the value. The other thing I talked about was the importance of scientific integrity, how President Obama has worked it into everything that we have done across all federal agencies. Suzette Kimball is our scientific integrity officer. And while I didn't use these exact words, I encourage people to speak up and to talk about the importance of scientific integrity, and if they see that being undermined, to say something about it. So the policies that have been put in place to make sure that science continues to be foundational are not going to be easy to undo, and I don't think there's going to be any reason that a successor administration is going to want to undo them, because they are so important to the decisions that we make every single day. But while I didn't emphasize it to the extent that I wanted to in the session a few minutes ago, it is so important for scientists to be vocal, to speak up for scientific integrity, to speak up for the importance of their work, and to share that in a way that people can understand. So there's a lot of, I think, uncertainty around the scientific community about what a transition of administration means. Some of the other things that I pointed out is that science is in the best interests of our nation. It's in the best interests of businesses, and they're going to have to start talking a bit of the language of business, perhaps, to translate that into a way that an administration that may be a little more business-oriented will relate to, just as I related to it as a business person coming into this job. So that's a quick summary. My colleague, Suzette Kimball, the Director of the U.S. Geological Survey, is a scientific integrity officer for the U.S.GS. She's been with the agency and a scientist contributing to the public for many years, and has helped guide our efforts and ensure that our science is sound, and that our science continues to further our mission in public lands, water, wildlife, and disseminating that to the public at large. So I'll stop with that and be happy to take your questions. Yes, sir, in the back.
Craig Miller with KQED Science. Governor Brown has sent a letter to you and President Obama asking for an immediate ban, a permanent ban on offshore drilling on the West Coast. How do you plan to respond to that? How will you advise the President on that? And will it stick, do you think, under the circumstances?
So I'm aware of the letter, although I've been on the road since I think it came through, so I read about it in the newspaper. We just completed a 5-year plan by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management for the next 5 years, 2017 to 2022, for offshore drilling, and that did not include any drilling on the Pacific coast in the lower 48, largely because of the states saying we do not want drilling activity here. Of course, there is oil off California. There's been drilling in years past, but the state has been pretty steadfast in saying we don't want it here. So that is a process that went through a lengthy environmental impact statement that took input from a lot of different sources. We had the draft proposed plan, the proposed plan, and then the final plan. And that is a process that would need to be done if that was to be reversed in some way. So it's not easy to undo. Governor Brown's request, I think, was for the President to use what's called the 12A withdrawal authority. That could be undone as easily as it can be done. It's executive action. So I think those are, as we take input on this and understand the case that the governor's made in terms of why, we'll be looking at that and making a recommendation to the president on whether this does make sense or whether we think that the process that we've gone through on the 5-year plan is the best mechanism to make sure that we take into account the interests of the state of California. Thank you. Go right here.
So, Peter Aldous with BuzzFeed News. This administration has been pretty active declaring national monuments. I know that's been controversial in some parts of the country, Utah being one. There is some speculation that another one could be declared before the administration leaves office. That will be Bears Ears. Are you able to comment on the likelihood of that at all?
I'll comment broadly and say that the president has used the Antiquities Act a number of different times, just as 16 presidents have, 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans, since it was created under Theodore Roosevelt in 1906. I think that very few of those national monument designations, including ones that you're familiar with, like the Grand Canyon, which was a national monument, all had controversy. And I've seen a lot of the documents and the news reports from those days that talked about the controversy with each of those national monuments that we now take for granted. And most of them, or many of them, have been turned by Congress into national parks. This president has been very careful in his use of the Antiquities Act to make sure that he has taken into account all points of view. In the case of the region in southeast Utah, that the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, a group of 5 different tribes, came to us and said warranted protection, is also an area that the state of congressional members from the state of Utah have suggested warrants protection through something called the Public Lands Initiative. So I spent 4 days in Utah with staff members from Congressman Bishop, Congressman Chaffetz, Senator Hatch, and Governor Herbert, and went through those communities, met with county councils, and hosted an open public meeting for about 1,500 people on a very hot day in Bluff, Utah, to understand the concerns of the community and the interests of the community. And one thing that was very clear was that people from tribal communities to residents of the region to people from around the area said, this is spectacular in terms of its importance culturally, spiritually to Native American tribes, incredible natural beauty that warrant protection. So it's certainly something that the president is contemplating, as is Congress contemplating. So I won't get out ahead of the game and talk about any likelihoods, but it's a place where we've done a tremendous amount of work. I'm very proud that the president's monument declarations or designations have been done after taking into account a lot of different information, including the science on the ground, the archaeology, the anthropology if appropriate, the ecosystem health, the importance of the resource and the threats to the resource, and all of those will be taken into account as they have in the past in any monument designations that might happen in the future.
Thank you. Thanks for coming to do this. I'm Irene Klotz with Reuters. Are you concerned about the fate of public lands under a Trump administration?
I think Americans value their public lands highly. There is certainly rhetoric and noise out there about, give them back to the states. That is not something that has been supported by the president-elect. In his words, he's talked about the importance of keeping lands public, keeping public lands public. I had a governor from a western state, Republican governor, that said to me, I don't want to take over your public lands. You spend more on firefighting in my state than I spend on the combination of education and criminal justice combined. So I think that it's a false narrative that's out there. It sort of sounds good from a soundbitey standpoint, but I don't think that there's interest in that. And I think that there are a lot of allies for public lands that have come forward and will continue to come forward to make the case for public lands. For example, a number of the sportsmen's groups came and made their voices heard at state legislatures around the West to say access to public lands is really important to us. And if you turn these over to state lands or you sell them to the highest bidder, we will not have the kind of habitat that we rely on for our passion of hunting and fishing and sporting activities, or in the case of tribal communities, subsistence. We rely on these public lands being public, and we rely on them being accessible. So those voices are pretty loud out there. They've been very helpful to us, and I think that if you assume that you get the public lands and you continue to get the federal money, but you take them over by the state, that's a false assumption. That would not happen. They would lose the budget, and the only way that many states, many of them are really struggling budget-wise, would be able to manage those lands effectively would be to sell them to the highest bidder, and that's just not something we support, and it's not something people are going to sit quiet on should there be a movement to do that in the future. But I would not expect that to be supported by the old administration, the incoming administration, or administrations to follow. I think there's a clean-cut case for the value of public lands. In the back?
Your Scott Waldman with Energy and Environment News
over
and
there.
Climate Wire. Your successor has just been named, and just wanted to get your take on what you think he might do, what your opinion of his work is, and if there's any sort of policies you're particularly concerned about, or that your staff is concerned about that might be targeted under his tenure.
You know, I presume you're talking about Congressman Zinke. I only know what I've read in the paper. I don't think that there has been an announcement by the president-elect himself, nor an acceptance, so it's a little premature for me to comment on that. I will say that no matter who takes over in my chair, we are going to do everything we can to help that person succeed. We are set up to support the transition effort. We've got, as I mentioned in my talk earlier, 71,000 employees, of which only about 120 or so are political staffers. He will have to win the hearts and minds, or whomever is ultimately nominated by the president-elect, of the career staff to be able to get things done. I do think that for a candidate for my job that is from a Western state, that understands sort of the situation on the ground, that will be helpful to them. A state that has a number of Indian tribes, which is an important part of Interior's portfolio. A state that is seeing the effects of climate change on the ground, and pine bark beetle, for example, that has been a good partner with Interior on things like sage grouse habitat and thoughtful balance of conservation and development. You know, those are all helpful. But anybody that sits in my chair is going to quickly recognize the complexity of the work, the need to work with career staff, and the value of getting yourself up to speed quickly. And we're just going to do everything we can to make sure that happens.
Danielle Benton with
There you are. Sorry.
KQED. You mentioned in your lecture that the Department of the Interior has signed an MOU with the state of California just yesterday.
That's
Can you
correct.
tell us what that commits both parties to and how permanent you think it might be?
Well, so an MOU oftentimes is, it can be undone by either party. So, but it is a continuation of the important work that we've been doing with the state of California on facilitating renewable energy development. And so that means supporting an expedited permitting process for areas of renewable energy development that have already been deconflicted. So, for example, the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan in the California desert is 10 million acres of public land, and also the areas that have been identified to support an expedited permitting are also close to existing or prospective transmission infrastructure. So a big part of what the MOU talks about is continuing to facilitate that to help California meet its renewable energy goals. It also addresses offshore resources. The Department of the Interior oversees the Outer Continental Shelf from the 3-mile state limit out beyond to the EEZ. We have done, I think, 11 leases in the East Coast along the Atlantic seaboard for wind energy development. First steel in the water was a couple years ago, and it started generating power for Block Island and Rhode Island. That's actually in state waters, but we permitted the transmission undersea. There are a number of those that are moving forward. We've got one in New York here coming up very soon. California is deeper water. You're talking about a floating technology, but the MOU does commit us to continue to work with the state of California in furthering offshore renewable energy development. So really it's a commitment to continue to support the state's efforts through the federal public lands and the land management agencies to help the state reach its 50% goal of renewable energy.
I think we have time for one more question.
Are there any other questions?
Bud Ward with the Al Climate Connection. Secretary Jewell, about 9 days ago, the EPA administrator said her agency had been visited only once by the transition team for less than 1 hour, one person, and that was before Thanksgiving. Can you comment on the frequency and even perhaps a little bit on the nature of your dealings with the landing team or the transition team? Is that representative of Interior's experience?
It is career staff within our agency that are interacting with the transition team. We certainly had more interaction than what was suggested by EPA. There are the members of the transition team that have been identified, and they continue to add new members over time, largely have been veterans of the Interior Department under the Bush administration, which means they come in with an understanding of the work that we do, the importance of the work, and that is, I'd say, very helpful. But it's premature to sort of identify how that process is going to go. We are geared up and ready to go, making all the resources that they want available, and I suspect that additional members would be added in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Jewell, or Secretary
I'm not
Jewell,
a doctor. I just
and
have
Dr.
a
Kimball.
bachelor's degree.
We'll give you an honorary one
Yeah,
from AGU.
okay. I got a couple of those.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.